You're looking for a sub that actually makes your whole system feel complete, not just a box that rattles the floor while you wait for the big bass label to kick in. You want something that will sit on a shelf or a small stand, blend into the room, and give you that extra depth without forcing you to rewire everything or buy a separate amp. And, of course, you want to spend your money on something that earns the price tag rather than just adding another line item to the bill of materials. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started digging into powered subwoofers for my own small room home theater, the first thing that kept me up at night was the fear of overpaying for a sub that either sounds too aggressive for a bookshelf setup or stays so polite that you never notice it. I've tried a few sealed units that promised deep bass only to end up with a box that was louder than it was useful, or a ported model that needed a whole separate enclosure to behave. The REL T/9X landed on my radar because it's marketed as a sealed, Class AB design that's supposed to be the sweet spot between authority and subtlety, and because REL's reputation in high-end hi-fi circles is built on making subs that integrate rather than dominate. First off, the most obvious question is, where does this sub fit in a typical setup? The T/9X is a 10-inch driver in a sealed cabinet, which means it delivers tight, fast transient low frequencies. That's perfect if you already have a decent pair of three-way floor standers or a high-quality bookshelf pair and you're missing the body that turns a good soundtrack into an immersive one. The manufacturer says it's optimal for modest three-way or high-quality bookshelf speakers, and that matches what I've heard in the community. People with speakers like the KEF Q350, ELAC Debut B6, or even a modest Bowers & Wilkins 606 tend to notice a noticeable lift in the lower mids and a more defined rumble in movie explosions. One of the practical strengths that stands out is the flexibility of the inputs. The T/9X offers RCA line-level inputs, which means you can plug it directly into your preamp, AV receiver, or even a dedicated sub-out on a stereo amp without needing a separate crossover. I ran a quick test in my living room, which is about 250 square feet, using the sub's line-level input from my Denon AVR 1600H. The setup was plug-and-play. I connected the sub, set the phase switch to 0, and used the volume knob to match it to my main speakers. Within a minute the room sounded fuller, the low end of a John Coltrane record became more present, and the opening thunderclap in a Marvel movie didn't just whoosh past the sofa, it actually resonated in the room. Now, the value proposition. At roughly the mid to high-end price point for a sealed 10-inch unit, you're paying not just for the driver, but for the Class AB amp that sits inside. Class AB gives you a smoother gain curve and lower distortion than a typical Class D sub that you might find in a budget bundle. In real terms, that translates to less boomy and more musical bass, the kind of low end that supports the rest of the music instead of overwhelming it. If you're the type who measures SPL or watches waterfall plots, you'll see the T/9X holds its ground up to about 90 dB in a moderate room, which is more than enough for most home theater or stereo listening scenarios. But there are trade-offs you need to be aware of before you click Add to Cart. Because the cabinet is sealed, the sub's maximum output is naturally lower than a ported equivalent of the same size. If you have a very large open-plan space, say a 900 square foot living area with high ceilings, you might find the T/9X starts to struggle to keep up with the sheer volume of air you're trying to move. The manufacturer mentions it can handle spaces up to 800 square feet, and in practice that means you'll get solid performance in most living rooms, but you could need a second sub or a larger ported design for truly cavernous spaces. Another point that came up when I read a handful of forum threads is the placement flexibility. The T/9X is relatively compact and has a front-firing driver, which makes it work well when placed on a low shelf or a sturdy piece of furniture. However, the front-firing nature also means you'll want to keep it a few inches away from a wall if you're aiming for the tightest bass. Too close and you'll get a slight boominess that can mask the subtlety the sealed design tries to deliver. In my own setup I positioned it about 12 inches from the back wall, and the result was a clean, defined low-frequency response without any muddy buildup. Who should consider the T/9X? If you already own a respectable pair of bookshelf or small floor standing speakers and you feel something is missing when you watch a movie or listen to a bass-heavy track, this sub is